6th to 12th grade, if you could join Jordan at that door and head on out for the den. Once again, you will start meeting every week starting next week in the Family Life Center at 10 a.m. Alrighty. So today we're going to talk about giving God's way, and we're going to talk about this for the next 2 weeks just to have a little mini-series, and it's going to be around how God gives and how that correlates to how we give when it comes to our time of giving. Now, many times people want to separate our time and separate our talents and separate our treasures, and yet in the Bible, there's nowhere in there where that happens. In fact, in the Bible, Jesus said that we are to give of our time, treasures, and talents. Time, talents, and treasures. Talents, treasures, and time. They all are combined into one. And so we don't get to pick and choose. It's not like we're going into a buffet and we want the chicken and we want the beef, but we don't want the pork or any of those other kind of things. It's a combination of those three. So where do I start with this? Well, naturally, I have to start with myself when it comes to, from the financial side of things. And last night, I'm watching the games with my son, the baseball games. And in the baseball games, for those of you who are watching, and I'm sure a lot of you are watching the Indians, and we're like, oh my goodness, it's the season's coming to an end and all those other kind of things. And let's hope that when we get home that we get some home cooking and it all changes. But if even it doesn't, it's been a wonderful, fantastic season, and we should be thankful for that. Because there's 5 teams in each league, so there's 10 teams, and there's 20-some teams that are home. And thankfully, we've had one that's been a winner now for years and years and years, and we should embrace that. But still, while we're watching that and you're hoping, you still want to win, right? So as I'm watching and I'm thinking about all these things, a commercial comes up. And it's a baseball bat. And in this baseball bat, there's only 5,000 of these bats. And this bat you can get for the small price of $129.95. And it goes and it's talking about the guy that did it, and this guy hit 50 doubles and had 30 home runs. He had 100 runs batted in and 100 runs scored, and it's the third baseman for Houston. He's already hit home runs against us in both games, and this guy's by the name of Alex Bregman. Oh my goodness, how cool is that? But there's only 5,000, so you better hurry. You better call this number. It's only $129.95 plus shipping and handling, so whatever ends up being $150, $160. So I'm like, okay, I don't really want that. I'm not a Houston fan, even though I like their team, everything about it. Then, 2 breaks later, boom. Did you know the Yankees hit the most home runs ever this year? And this limited edition baseball bat you can get with all their names on it and how many home runs that they hit. And it's only 5,000 of them. It's $129.95. And then later, by the way, we've also put this bat out. And this is only 5,000 are going to be made. It's $129.95. And I'm sitting there thinking, my goodness, by the end of this game, I could buy a bat for every team that's in the playoffs right now. So I could have 10 bats at just $129.95. And 10 bats for just the shipping and handling. So let's say $150 each. I could literally spend $1,500 just watching a baseball game. And what do they do to us? They try and say, look, there's a limited number, and you have to get these now, and you better hurry up and call, and here's the easy way to buy it. And if you don't have a phone for whatever reason, you're in the Stone Ages, then you can go to the internet. And if you don't have the internet, then go to your neighbor's house and borrow their internet, whatever you have to do. But $129.95 plus shipping, $150, and you have to have these. And I'm sitting there thinking, that would be so cool. Like my son Jacob would love to have these all the way around his room. But just watching a 3-hour baseball game, I could easily drop $1,500. And why? Well, there's 2 reasons. One, because I'm a consumer. And when I have something that I like, I want to consume it. I want to get that, get more of it, and have more of it. And then what ends up happening is not just becoming a consumer, I then become a hoarder because I have these 10 bats this season, and oh my goodness, I did that last year, so let me do this again next year. And let me do this the next year after that, and the year after that. And the next thing you know, you've got 18 million baseball bats, so you spend $150, and then you look back and you're like, why? I mean, really, why did I do that? I mean, why would I go out and buy all these things? It's what our society does to us. We don't think about the total cost. We don't think about down the road. We think about, okay, the right here and right now, because we have been conditioned within our society to think that. Way, way, way back in the day, people didn't lease cars. They didn't spend money on a lease payment. They bought a car. They put the money aside, then they went and bought it, and you didn't go and say, hey, listen, I'm going to give you this much a month. Would you hold this car for me for 60 months, and then I'll come back and pick it up? You went and you bought the car. That's what people did. But now everything is based on the payment. Everything is a minimum payment. Everything is a credit card payment. Everything is a department store payment. Everything is monthly. Or everything is, I can hang this on my wall. I can use this. I'm going to consume it. Or I'm going to hoard it. I'm going to hoard it. And here's the thing. For me, what that leads to is discontent. It leads to discontent because it used to be that you didn't necessarily know what everyone had. I remember talking to my brother-in-law a long time ago, and we saw this commercial where these people lived like way up on a mountain, and they had to drive all the way down to get their mail, and it was just junk mail. But they had to drive, it was like a Jeep Cherokee, so it was a Jeep Cherokee commercial, and the thing drove all the way down just to get the mail, and he was like, I could live like that. And I'm like, there's no way that I could live like that. I just couldn't do it. But see, if you live like that, and you live that far out, I wouldn't know what everyone else had. I wouldn't care what everyone else had. And so whatever I had might mean even more to me. It might have a lot of meaning. Whereas now, when I can see it on the internet, and I can see it on TV, and I can see what my neighbors have, and I can see what my neighbors get, and I'm happy for all of them. I think it's fantastic. But what it does for me is it leads me to a spot of being discontent. I've got to consume more, and eventually I've got to hoard more. I've got to have more. The cell phone I have right now is an iPhone 6, which is like almost ancient now at this point. It's like 2 or 3 years old, and they slow them down on purpose. And so the new commercial that came out also during this baseball game was this new IMAX, whatever S that they have. And one of Jacob's friends was at the house, and he was like, yeah, he goes, I was going to get that thing. He goes, but it costs, you ready for this? Glad you're sitting down. $1,300. $1,300. So I called up and said, do you guys only have 5,000 of these? Can you put my name on it? Can I get it with a baseball bat? I mean, $1,300, but that's where life is going. Because it just used to be just a few short years ago that those 1,300, they were only 600. Now 600 doesn't seem so bad. And before that, they were only 200. And before that, you just got them thrown in with the plan and you didn't even know that. But see, we have to have it, and we have to have more. And it leads for me personally to discontent. So I got to thinking, if it leads to me being discontent, well, what does that do for everyone else? And if I were to ask you, how are you doing as far as your buying patterns, and how are you doing as far as the things that you have to have, do you ever notice the fact that, yeah, there's times where we have to have more? Yeah, there's times where what I have isn't good enough, and yet I'll keep what I have, but then there's also times where I look at the stuff I have, and I'm like, I wish I could sell this back, and I could get 25 or 50 or 75% of it back so I could go and buy another one. And so naturally what ends up taking place for all of us is we have this constant turmoil, this constant churning from within. And it's because of what our society does to us, which says, buy now, buy now, buy now. Buy it in case you need it. Buy it in case you don't need it. Just in case you don't, put it back. Make sure you have this. You never know when this might turn. This could be worth more money. It doesn't matter what it is. It's constantly coming after our pocketbook, after our wallet, after our checkbook, after our savings account. It wants more and more and more, and we feed that. And here's the thing about it. God knew that. God knew that was going to happen with you, and God knew it was going to happen with me. And so His Word gives us ways that we can guard against this. A friend of mine a while back was going on vacation with his wife, and it was just the two of them. They don't have any children, so they were going to this place, and they had to drive up this mountain. And they were excited about it because they got to drive to the top of whatever this tallest mountain thing was in the area they were going. Now, in their mind, you start at the bottom of the mountain, and then you go all the way up to the top, which was great. What they didn't know was that on the drive up is that it literally is one of those mountains that goes along the mountain. I'm sorry, one of those roads that goes along the mountain. It kind of goes around it. You keep going up and higher and higher and higher. And to the right is nothing but caverns and big old cliff, and you could drive off the road at any time. You know, who knows what's going to happen kind of thing. And so my friend is all excited because they're driving to the top of the mountain. And as they're going, he's like, oh, look at this, look at this, look at this. And his wife is telling him, just keep your eyes on the road. And as they're getting closer and closer to the peak, and it's going to be safer, he looks over at his wife, and she has all the way down inside the car like this where she can't even see out. Because There was nothing that was guarding the outside. There was nothing that was there to protect them. She hated heights and everything about it. So as they were making the climb, she literally had shut down completely because there was no guardrail. When they finally got to the top, they got out and looked, God bless you, looked at everything, and they're like, oh my goodness, how cool is this, how cool is this, how cool is this? She was mad at him because there was no guardrail. He didn't build guardrails. That wasn't his job. That wasn't his life, calling. That was up to somebody else to do. But they decided, listen, if you're going to climb this mountain, you don't need a guardrail. This is part of climbing the mountain. And yet many times when we're climbing the mountain in society and we're climbing the mountain in our lives, because we don't have guardrails, we tend to get off the beaten path. But guardrails are there for a reason. Guardrails are there to protect us. Guardrails are to keep us from going too far one direction where we could hurt ourselves or go off a cliff or bad things could happen. And so many times we put guardrails up, right? Like as a husband or wife put guardrails up is going, I can't spend too much time, with that person. And I can't have one-on-one, conversations outside of work or outside of wherever with that person. And I can't have these discussions with you one-on-one alone, or I can't give that person a ride home or whatever it might be one-on-one. We put those guardrails up. We put guardrails up when it comes to hopefully the content that we see within our cell phone or when we're online. We put guardrails up whether it's from the gambling side or from pornography or from whatever it might be that can pull us away from what God is intending us to do. And so we stay focused in those areas, especially when it comes to our time. And we stay focused in those areas sometimes when it comes to our talents. But where we tend to not do that the most is when it comes to the treasure that God has given us. So today, as we talk about these finances, you have to understand something. God has put guardrails in place for you so that as you're climbing the mountain and as you're getting closer and closer to the top, that you don't have to worry about veering off and going off the cliff or sliding off the road or going into a ravine. Now here's the thing I want to point out. You may be someone that is just terrible, terrible, terrible with finances. God can fix this. He wants to fix it. Because He knows that at the end of the day that this is a matter not after your money, but a matter that's after your heart. And you may be someone sitting here right now that is fantastic when it comes from a financial standpoint. You'll never go into debt. You'll always have enough. Your kids will have enough. Your kids' kids will have enough. Everyone around you will have enough. But here's the thing. Are you giving according to how God would want you to give? Because the first person that doesn't have enough and is always struggling with the finances, they're the consumer. I consume, I consume, I consume. And the second person that hoards, they just keep and keep and keep. And on both sides, we're not giving as God intends for us to give. And to God, the thing that matters the most is not your money, is not your assets, is not your debt. What matters to God the most is your heart in the matter. We're going to start with the first verse today. Jason's going to put this up. This is what Jesus had to say about this. He's having a discussion with the disciples, and He knows that there's things that are going to try and pull Him away. He knows there's things that are going to try and take them away from what God is intending in their life. And so He says this. He says, no one can serve two masters. Now, if we stop there for a second and we say, okay, well, no one can serve two masters. And I asked you, who's your master that you serve? Some of us would sit down and say, well, I don't serve any master. There's no master that I serve. My husband's not my boss. My wife's not my boss. My grandparents aren't the boss. Nobody is the boss of me. I'm the boss of me. And so we've already put ourselves ahead of God. Jesus understood that this could be an issue, but He also understood that when it came down to that master, that within this world, you are going to serve something. And so the thing that is going to be the biggest competition to serving, He's going to share here shortly. But when it talks about the master, it's talking about what it is that possesses us. What is it that owns us? What is it that takes us away? What is it that we focus upon the most? And He said this, either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. So these possessions, this thing that's possessing you, this thing that's owning you, this thing that is you think of first, that the first thing when you go to think of something, you're either going to love that and hate something else, or you're going to be devoted to that and you're going to end up despising something else. And here's the thing, he says, you cannot serve. Now, let's stop here for a second. When we think of serving, we think of going on a mission trip. We think of helping our neighbor. We think of doing a job in our community. We think of helping out a widow, or we think of helping out a single mom. We think of all these different areas. When it talks about serving here, it is saying this: you are either going to love. It's a devotion. You are either going to love, you're going to serve. This is what is going to be on your mind most of the time. You cannot serve, you cannot love both God and money. Love them both. You cannot serve both of them because one is going to be here and one is going to be here. And we hope to get to the point where if this is money, this is God, that we get God here and then money is just kind of everything else. But Jesus knew the one thing that was going to be after your heart and after my heart the most wasn't the devil, wasn't our devotional life, wasn't our prayer life, wasn't our time away from Him. It was going to be, at the end of the day, love of money. I have a lot of friends that I've known over the years have a lot of money. I didn't even know that they had a lot of money. Because the way they give according to how God gives. And they give because this guardrail was put up where Jesus said this: what's going to take most of your time? It's not going to be me. It's going to be what this world has to offer. And guys, we are the number one when it comes to this as far as struggling with it. Because when we're younger, most of our thoughts are around the female. And as we start to get older, those thoughts start to change and they're replaced. And you think, oh, then it would go to God. It doesn't. It goes to finances. And so if your first half of your life is spent focusing on women and your second half of your life is focused on finances, where's God in either one of those? Well, hopefully you've put God first in both of those, within those relationships. And hopefully you've put God first in both those as far as our finances. Because it's the number one thing that is after your heart, guys, and after my heart, guys. Now, ladies, you're not far behind. Okay? How many of you today, before you got all ready and made yourself look nice before you came out, made sure that your shoes and your purse and your shirt and everything you had matched? Go ahead. How many? 3 of you? Okay, the rest of you are lying. Good to know. Good to know. Right? But and nowadays, listen, this is what's happening. Nowadays, we even accessorize even more. Because I talked to someone the other day and I said, hey, I didn't know that you wore glasses. And they were like, oh, no, they're just for looks. I'm like, really? Like, yeah, don't they look good? I'm like, yeah, they do look good. I talked to another lady, said, hey, I didn't know you wore glasses. She's like, yeah, those are just for looks. And I'm like, so even now, this is what our society does. It tries to take more and more from us so that we can look good, look great. And it's covering all of us, all over the place. I'm not just ripping on women. Guys, we can do this as well. I'm not just ripping on guys when it comes to the thought process. Women, we can do this as well. But know this, the more that we focus on money, the less we focus on what God is doing in our lives. So how do we know between the two? How can we determine between the two? Well, let me explain to you the two sides as far as the masters go. If you are someone that you live first with what you have, you save second, and you give third, you are mastered by money. You live first, you save second, and you give third. You are mastered by money. What I live on is about me. What I save is about me. And what I give, if I give it in the right heart, that's about God. God wants us to flip that completely upside down. what I give first, what I save second, and what I live on last. What I give first says God is first and others are first. What I save, okay, yeah, there's nothing wrong with saving. I have that because I gave in the right heart. And then what I live on, it's all good. I'll live on whatever's left. I challenge every young couple that I sit down with when I do their wedding. I say, listen, here's the first thing I wanted to challenge you with. Live on 50%. And they look at me like I have four heads. And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, live on 50% of what you make. If you make $100,000, the government's already going to take 30, so you're at 80 or 70. I can't even do math. You're already at 70. So with that 70,000, live on $35,000 of it. So you had 100. You gave 30 to the government because they took it. You're down to 70. You live on 35. You have 35 left. So I gave 10 of that to God because I give her the first fruits. I still have 25 left. What can you do with that 25,000? Every time now that there's a raise, I live and focus upon that percentage. Because when I get to 110,000, the government's already taken their 3,000. So I'm down to 7,000. I'm going to live on that 3,500. But first I'm going to give 1,000 to God. Then I'm going to save the rest. You will have more and more margin. And here's the great thing that will happen. When things come up, such as a hurricane, such as an earthquake, such as a mudslide, such as a tsunami, which are all going on, such as a tornado, and you want to help someone, you're not a master to, well, what's my minimum payment? And how much interest am I paying? And how much am I in debt? And what about this payment and this payment and this payment? Because you have already set it aside and you can give. And when you're giving, you can give of what you have saved. Because you already know what you're living on, which is the rest of it. See, when we give last, we give God the leftovers. And I had to learn that the hard way. Twice, not once, but twice. $2.13 to our names. $2.13 to our names. Both times my fault. And it took Deanna one time saying, hey, are you writing the tithe payment out? And I'm like, well, we only have this much left. We only have this much left. And she said, why aren't you writing that first? Like, what do you mean? She goes, that should be the first thing you write, because otherwise aren't you just giving God the leftovers? She was right. I was giving God the leftovers. You know why? Because we were living, we were saving, and then we were giving. And when it turned upside down, yeah, I still had those payments and we still had those payments going on, but it changed my heart. And it can change yours too. God knows that this society is after your heart, and the easiest way to your heart is through your possessions and through my possessions. Is there anything wrong with having those possessions? Absolutely not. If you're using those to care for others and to love others, there's nothing wrong with it. But what it comes down to is if I give first, if I save second, and if I live on the rest, I'm giving God's way. I'm doing it God's way. And I'm giving God my heart in the process. Jesus cuts to the heart of the matter. If you go to Matthew chapter 6, verse 30, we're going to move down a little bit. This is what it says. It says, if that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and gone tomorrow, is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we, go ahead to the next one. What shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? Which are all questions that we have at times. God cares so much about that. Do you not believe that he would care that much more about you? And this, Jesus knows this. He's not pulling punches here. It's like, listen, I already know that the number one thing against me is not going to be the devil and your spiritual side and your prayer life. The number one thing against me is going to be what you have? No. What you do with what you have. And that's why we try to focus so much on the percentage side of it. Now, some of you guys had kids that went in here. Some of you guys have younger kids. Some of you are hoping to have kids one day. Here's a great way for you to help them. I shared this in a previous message. I might tie it in to next week so you have it as well. Get 4 jars, but just give them 3. And in the 3 jars, you have a jar that says give, a jar that says save, and a jar that says live. A jar that says give, save, and live. And then every dollar they make, take 10 dimes. Put the first dime in the give, put the second dime in the save, and put the rest of the dimes in the live. They can go get bubble gum and Reese cups and whatever it is they want to do with that money, that's theirs. But when it's gone, it's gone. They get to choose then where to give that money to people that will help. We believe that's with the local church, because that's why we come together here each week, is to hopefully help out missions and things like that we have. But did you know that our church gives that same way? The very first week that I was here as a pastor, I was here on a Thursday night. They said, we're closing the doors on Tuesday. I said, hold on a second, what's going on here? I sat down with all the people here. This church was a mission and outreach church that had no mission and no outreach. And what had happened was the almighty dollar had replaced the almighty. It's easy to get there. It happens at times. And it can happen even to the church. And when we talked about it, and they asked me if I would start to speak in different areas, but they said one of the areas we first have to speak about is going to be the almighty dollar. And I told them no. The first thing we're going to talk about is our foundation and what the foundation is of us as a church. And so we taught from Nehemiah for how many different weeks, and then we taught about our giving and what it meant to God. But I explained to them, I won't teach the first message until whatever it is that we take next week, the first 10% of it goes to missions. And they looked at me, every guy in that room, and said, we can't afford to do that. And I looked back at them and said, we can't afford not to. Because if I'm going to teach on finances, then this church has to give the way that God teaches as far as giving. Thursday night, closing on Tuesday. That was over 9 years ago. And every single Sunday, the first 10% of what comes in for our church goes to our missions. And for as long as I'm pastoring here, Lord willing, that's not going to change. And whether it's Hannah's Hope, locally, whether it's community outreach, whether it's Hope Outreach, whether it's the people in India, whether it's all the corners of the world, cities, community, all that stuff, the first 10%, our mission committee decides where that will go to. Because we need to give the way that God intended for us to give. So we give first. And then hopefully each of the people that are in leadership live that same way by giving, saving, and then living. And Jesus knew this. Jesus knew that your day-to-day stuff, He cares so much about you and you matter so much to Him, He's got you covered. He says this next, for the pagans run after all of these things. The pagans, who wants to be a pagan? Nobody, right? For the pagans run after all these things, and He says this next, and your Heavenly Father knows that you need Him. God already knows what you need. And many times we confuse need with want. And as He's blessing us along the way, we want and want and want. We consume, we hoard, that we forget to first give. But He knows what it is that you need. He's got you covered. You got to trust Him enough to do so. And then He says this. He says, here's how we give. You ready? This is the model behind it. But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness. Seek first His kingdom. We don't talk about kingdoms, right? When we think of a kingdom, we think about, okay, they're the most powerful people in the world. You know, the United States, the greatest military force right now, and then there's Russia over there, and that's a kingdom they have theirs. Then these smaller ones, that they're strong and all that kind of stuff. And over time, the Romans, they had their kingdom, they had their emperor, and there was Alexander the Great, and he had his kingdom, and they were going to get more and more land and more people and more, and gaining, and none of them were focused on God first. And in the very country in which we live, we have seen that as well. From a country that was focused on God and what He was doing, to now it's the national debt and how much this costs, and fighting here and going there and spending and hoarding and all of those things. We've lost sight on putting God first, which means we've lost sight of His kingdom. His kingdom was when Jesus was sent to the earth. His kingdom was when Jesus came to sit with all of us and be a part of all of us and love and care for others just as God does for us every single day. That was what was established. And we've lost sight of it. And whenever we live first and save second, and then we give third, whether we want to realize it or not, we've lost sight of it. We are not living as God intended for us to live. And listen, this is a game changer. This will turn your life upside down if you will start to do this the way that God will do it. I'm a walking example of it. Our family's a walking example of it. So if you have $2.14 that you can come up with right now, you are ahead of us not once, but twice. Change the way you live, save, and give, and change it to the way you give, save, and live. And God will turn it around completely. You know why? Because He'll turn your heart. He'll take care of everything else. He's got you day to day. Once again, not with what you have, but with what you do with what you have. His kingdom was a matter of heart, and it was a matter of love. And we have made it a matter of stuff. But seek first His kingdom and righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. So when you seek that, when you give the way He wants you to give, when you give with a heart, when you share with your heart, you'll not only gain all those things, but everything else that goes along with it. Because you'll be seeing as God sees. You'll be hearing as God hears. You'll be looking for things as God looks for things. You'll be looking to help people and to care for people. And to, in their biggest time of need, saying, I can be that one to do that because God's shown that with me. And every single area of my life shows that, is an example of it, is a testimony of it, is a light to share with others. I've messed up financially. I've screwed up financially. I've messed up from a bankruptcy side. I've had $2.13 in my name. Whatever it might be for each one of you. There's all been a time where you can look back and say, oh, my biggest area that I screwed up financially was this. And it was just the world getting us. You could turn it around whenever you choose to do so. Jesus continues, and this is what He says. Next verse. Therefore, what in the world is that therefore? Do not worry about tomorrow. For tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. And so when we talk about finances, you're going right now to that area in which you struggle the most within your finances. Can I make that payment this month? Am I going to have enough to cover this? Will I be able to reach this? Am I putting enough aside? You do not have to worry about any of those things when you take whatever it is that God has blessed you with and you give first and you save second and you live on the rest. Now listen, some of you are like, well, once I get this squared away, then at that point, then I'll do that. Because you're not changing your heart. Next week, I'm going to give you something so that you can keep track of this. But this week, I want you to go and say, I'm going to give, I'm going to save, and I'm going to live. I'll figure out the payments as far as they go. I might have to do some minimum payments. I'm going to start to get rid of some of these things. All that financial stuff is online. If you ever want to go out and look, Dave Ramsey, listen to his podcast every day. Get your financial piece, all that stuff. But with your heart, I'm giving this first 10 cents of this dollar. I'm saving that next 10 cents of the dollar. The government's already taken 30 cents. This last 50 cents, I am going to figure out how to live on that. It is a life and game changer. And I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to give it to God and allow Him to handle it. Because the love of money is the root of all evil, and it's the very thing that's taking me away from my love of God and my love of others. Go to these last verses if you would, please, Jason. This is from Mark chapter 10. It says, Jesus called them together. So He called all the disciples together. He brought everyone together. Hey, we're all sitting here. Let's all have a discussion about this. He said, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. I mean, it's like they remind you about it. It's like they call you on the phone and going, hey, you missed this payment. It's like, hey, I know you want to get this loan, but you never paid this bill. So we're going to have to raise your percentage. Or we're going to have to, put this higher, and you're going to have to pay more to get what it is that you want. And we don't stop at all. We're like, whatever it takes, whatever it takes, whatever it takes. See, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. We're going to tell you how you're going to live with this finances because we have the money. And the golden rule, if I were to ask you what the golden rule is, in this world, John just said it, he who has the gold makes the rules. Whereas Jesus said, do unto others. Oh, we don't know the golden rule? Do unto others. That's God's golden rule. But see, we already know the world's golden rule. Doing unto others doesn't have a price tag with it. Doing unto others doesn't have a Visa monthly payment. Doing unto others doesn't talk about interest. Doing unto others is God has done unto you is loving and caring for them. It gets to the heart of the matter. It says, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. So if you're a believer today, this should be a part of your everyday life. You should be giving. You should be saving. And then you should be living on the rest. Because if you're not, if you're living and then you're saving and then you're giving, you're not going it God's way. And you're not walking as a believer. That hurts, doesn't it? This is not me saying it. This is what Jesus is saying. You are being lorded over by this world. You have not a care in the world. Eat, drink, be happy, be merry, all those other kind of things. But you are missing out on what God has intended for your life and for mine. Because every time you get this opportunity to give, there's a release that takes place and there's a blessing that is involved in it. But we're so worried, and God says not to worry. We need to put these guardrails up so that we don't go off the cliff. And if you're a believer, Jesus is saying this, not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Go ahead, Jason. And whoever wants to be first must be a slave of all. For, why? I mean, that doesn't even sound any fun, does it? For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. For even the Son of Man did not come to be loved, but to love and to give his life as a ransom for many. He came to care. He came to serve. He came to love. He came to give. And God's standard wasn't 10%. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. And so as you're walking through every day and it comes to your finances and you're stuck on the next payment and you're worried about where the next thing's going to come from, don't worry. God's got it. You got to believe that. And as you're going through going, I've got to get this and I've got to consume this and I've got to hoard this. Listen, have you given first to God's kingdom? Are you taking care of God's kingdom? Or are you living as if this is the only place we're going to be? This is just the world and how it is. Because God doesn't want you to live that way. He wants you to serve and love and care for others and be a light. And it starts with the thing that we grab a hold of the most, which is the thing that takes us from the God that we love. Because you cannot serve both God and money. You cannot love both God and money because you're going to be devoted to one and end up despising the other. You're going to love one and end up hating the other. You're going to think of one and the other one's going to become an afterthought. And you and I choose in every thought and in every moment and every time we write a check and every time we hand over a credit card and every time that we give. Would you challenge yourself this week to focus upon where to give, where to save, and then where to live? Where to focus on God, where to handle my finances so that I have it for a rainy day, and then everything else I can live on. And ask yourself, where am I consuming? Where am I hoarding? Or am I giving everything I have to God first, and then he's got the rest of it? You cannot serve both God and money. You cannot serve both God and money. Would you all bow your heads with me, please, and say a word of prayer? Lord, I thank you for Jesus getting to the heart of the matter. God, it amazes me how he speaks more about money than any other topic, and it's not because of what he wants to get from us. It's what he wants to give to us. He wants to give us that peace. Lord, help each believer here today to help them to understand that this is an absolute game changer. This will turn their life upside down. If they would get to that point of just giving first God, when these moments come up that they want to be a part of it, when they want to help out with a natural disaster, when they want to care for someone, when they want to give clothes or give food or take someone shopping or whatever it might be, that they don't have to worry about, oh, what's this payment, what's going on. They can focus upon what you've blessed them with so that they can share those blessings with others. God, it turns our life upside down if we would just truly live this day by day. God, I know that for me personally, I know it was a struggle. I know it was easy to give the leftovers. I thank you for blessing me with someone who helped me focus upon that. But God, you blessed her with someone that focused upon that, and that is your son, Jesus. This message today cuts to the heart of the matter. It cuts to the kingdom in which you have established. It cuts to us focusing upon you first, and it comes to us focusing on who our master truly is. What is it that possesses us? What is it that owns us? God, we pray that it's you. Lord, we love you. We thank you for this time together. It's in your name that we pray. Amen. Would you all please stand?